Good evening, all of you. Welcome, all of you, for another session in our Zoom seminar. I hope all of you can hear us. And this is actually an initiative from two NGOs from Kerala, and it's we done almost 28 different session on different aspects of natural history. Tomorrow we have a session on butterflies identification. I mean, we already done a session on introduction to the butterflies of Western Ghats. So tomorrow is the identification. So people, those who are very keen on to identify different butterflies, please join us. It's going to be a very interesting session. And today we have Sudeep with us. He is very passionate about bees, and he's done some of the projects, and now he's doing some behavioral studies of bees in ICER Trivandrum. He is from Kerala. Also, he can probably give a bit more introduction of himself. What is his more keen, and he's also a keen birder. Anyway, over to you, Sudeep. Hope we can learn a lot from you.
Okay, thank you. Should I close the camera?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
please. I would request everyone to switch off your videos, because that will get otherwise there will be a bit of glitch in the video. So you can close all your videos. It will be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I hope I'm audible to everyone. So I've been.
Yes.
So I started doing or working with bees after my MSc. I did a project under Dr. Sinu PA from Central University of Kerala. So I had a recently good field experience in observing bees and how they forage on different flowers and how they extract their resources like nectar and pollen. And from then on, I have been following some of the great names in bee research, like Dr. Axel Brockman from NCBS, Dr. Hema Somanathan from ICER Trivandrum, then so on, like so many people who are into bees research. So I joined Dr. Hema Somanathan to work on behavior of bees, and that's what I've been doing. So here I'm not going into the nitty-gritty science aspects of bees. I'm mainly trying to give an interesting look about bees to make people interested in, or why we should look at bees and how they are interesting. So I'll be dealing more with eusocial bees, or fully social bees, which are belonging to the group of honeybees that we call. So without further delay, let's start. Okay, so the first slide, let's first talk about the evolutionary origins of bees. So bees have been known to have evolved from wasps. So the major change, or the turning point of how they diverged from wasps, is when they changed their diet from being a carnivorous one to a herbivorous one. So here you can see a phylogenetic tree that was recently published in a paper in 2017. And here you can see an enlarged version of this region here. And somewhere at node 14, you can have the ancestor of all the bees that are here today. So, so the main, they belong to the order Hymenoptera, which involves sawflies, wasps, bees, and ants. And these bees evolved from wasps. So they belong to the superfamily Apoideae and clade Anthophila. Okay, so now let's talk about diversity. So this is a pamphlet, actually. A pamphlet, this is a part of a pamphlet from something called Backyard Bees of North America. So you can see the different sizes, the different shapes, the different colors that these guys show. They're in fact one of the most diverse groups out there. Uh, so there are over uh, 16,000 species of bees out there. So towards the left, you can see a blue-banded bee in the genus Amygdala, and here we have social bees or the honey bee. This is actually Apis mellifera, and here you can see the queen and the workers on the comb. Then you have the carpenter bees called the Xylocopa genus. Then we have leafcutter bees from Halictidae. We have Euglosian bees or orchid bees. We have Apis florea and stingless bees. We have a lot of varieties of bees. So let's focus our attention on eusocial bees. Eusocial bees are those bees that show true sociality, meaning different individuals of the colony or any one particular individual of the colony is not cannot perform all the functions. So eusocial bees, why they are interesting? Because they have division of labor, and this division of labor is so strict that they can't do different functions, and each type of bee or each caste of bee has a set of jobs that they have to do in the hive. So at the top you have the worker. The worker is a sterile female, and its main job is housekeeping, foraging, and defense of the colony. And next you have the queen bee. The queen bee is visibly larger than the worker bee. So this is the only mature female of the colony, and its main job is egg laying, along with other functions such as maintaining the structure of the colony. So then you have the drone bee, which is a mature male, and its main job is mating with other queens. So delving into the next interesting aspect of honeybees is that their sex, the male-female distinction, is based on their ploidy, or how many set of chromosomes they have. So the drone of the honeybee colony is the haploid individual, which means it has half the number of chromosomes compared to the female. And the females, there are two categories: the female worker and the female queen, and they both are diploid, which means they are formed from the fusion of egg and sperm, while the drone is developed from an unfertilized egg. So that is one of the interesting aspects, where the sex of the individual is determined by the ploidy, or the state of the ploidity of the chromosomes. So let's start where a new queen emerges. So once a new queen emerges from a particular queen cell, the first thing that it does is seek out other queens that are born in the colony. So it preferentially seeks out other queens. They fight with the other queens, and only one will remain standing. Then what happens? The queen that has won the fight will just fly out from the hive. So this flight is called the nuptial flight, and in this nuptial flight they mate with drones. So the mating is very interesting. So what happens is that the drones from different colonies congregate away from the hive, usually 90 meters away from the hive, or more than 90 meters away from the hive, called drone congregations. So they collect in huge numbers, like kind of a party kind of a thing. And then once a queen approaches, the queen emits some pheromones. Pheromones are nothing but gaseous hormones. So these signaling substances attract the drones. So the drones follow the queen and mate with the queen. So here you can actually, over here you can see two queens fighting, and then here you can actually see a drone congregation. So here they have actually hoisted a bee in a cage, and then and you can see that how the drones are actually attracted towards the queen, and they try to mate with the queen. The drone, after mating, it's along with the mating, its internal organs also rip out, so the drone dies after mating. So this is a photograph of a queen bee and a drone mating. Then here you can actually see, once the mating is done, the queen returns back to the hive, the mated queen returns back to the hive, and the next thing it starts doing is laying eggs. And the queen can be called as an egg laying machine. So here is actually a photograph of an egg that has been laid in a cell. So the queen is very particular about some certain aspects of where it has to, or where it will lay an egg. So it goes through the hive, rates the hive, and just looks for clean and well prepared cells, and then lays just one single egg per cell that it decides to lay the egg. So here you can actually see a queen being surrounded by workers or being attended by the workers. Okay. So one thing I forgot to mention is that the queen substance. So this is a very interesting, pheromone. So there has been studies, and it has been shown that the queen substance, the main component of the queen substance that attracts these drones is oxo-2-decanoic acid, which is an organic molecule, and this is what actually attracts the drone towards the to the female or the queen. Okay. So to serve or to rule, to rule or to serve, that is the question. So so we know that both the workers and the queen are both female. So what decides who is going to be a queen and who is going to be a worker? So this is in fact actually one of the most extreme examples of epigenetics. So what is epigenetics? It is simply put in very simple terms, it is a phenomenon where two individuals having the same same type of genes or same potential, because of some environmental factors, certain genes are being activated and some are being suppressed. So based on the environment, the same type of genes express differently. So both a worker here and a queen bee here, probably even if they are clones, one can become a queen and one can become a worker just because of an environmental factor. It could. So here in this case, the environmental factor here is something called royal jelly. So this is a substance that the worker bees produce from its head. So it's a secretion. So when an egg is laid, the workers provision the egg with honey, pollen, and royal jelly. For a worker, it is taken off of the royal jelly diet after 2 to 3 days, while excuse me. Okay.
Okay, continue. Please continue.
an exclusive diet of royal jelly. That is what sets the queen apart from a worker. So the royal jelly just activates the sex organs, activates the ovaries, and it becomes visibly larger than the worker. And all this is the magic of this substance that the workers produce called the royal jelly. So it's a milky white secretion from the worker bee's head. So here you can actually see a picture of two queen cells in which there is a larvae, and it's surrounded by royal jelly that was provisioned by the worker bees. So here on the left side you can see an egg developing into a larvae, and the diet, if the diet is exclusively royal jelly, then it slowly develops into a queen. And if the diet is changed from the royal jelly to honey and pollen, it develops into a worker. So here you can actually see how pricey this royal jelly is. So why this is being marketed is because the worker and the queen, even though they have similar genetic structure, the queen lives for around 3 years on average, and it can go up to 5 years, but the worker dies almost within a month after it's born. So the longevity of the queen is also due to consumption of royal jelly throughout its life. So there have been studies to see why this royal jelly has such a remarkable effect on the queen in its longevity and its ability to reproduce like this. So this is a paper published in Nature Communications recently in 2018, wherein they have seen that there is a protein component of this royal jelly called royal actin, which has cross-species effects on longevity, fertility, and regeneration. And also it has been shown to show effect in mammalian stem cells. So what they have found out is that this royal actin has the ability to keep stem cells in a naive state. That means to basically maintain this stem cell ness of a particular group of cells, which means that these cells can keep on dividing and differentiating into different cell types, which basically improves the longevity of the queen bee. So they have found a human analog called Regina, which is a mammalian structural analog, which induces naive-like state in mouse embryonic stem cells. But we don't have any proof whether consumption of royal jelly itself by us or in mammals has any actual effect on increasing longevity or retarding aging or anything like that. But in any case, it's being marketed as a highly valuable substance, which goes for around, you can see that here it goes for around 2,000 rupees or so for 60 grams. So here is a short video clip of bees developing, how they actually develop from an egg to a newly hatched bee. So here you can actually see larvae in royal jelly combined with nectar and pollen. So a few moments ago, I hope you heard them saying varroa mites. So this is one of the parasites of bees that has been causing a lot of colony collapse disorders that you might have heard about, wherein colonies of bees just you know uh, gets destroyed because of such mites. Okay. So here you can actually see the first job that they do after coming out of their cell is cleaning the cells. Okay. So workers, let's come to the workers, and they are the most abundant members of the colony. They are, you can say, the backbone of the colony. The job that these workers do is first of all determined by their age and also some other factors. So mainly it is the age of the bee that determines what work the bee is going to do in the colony. So very young bees that just hatched out, they have underdeveloped flight muscles, and they don't have a stinger or a well-developed stinger. So since they can't fly, and since they can't guard their nest, their first main job is the cell cleaning, or basically the cleaning or housekeeping of the comb. Uh, and from 3 to 11 days, they nurse. They are the nursing workers, which means they are involved in nursing the larvae, that is mainly feeding the larvae, provisioning the larvae with royal jelly, with nectar, with pollen, etc. And some of them also do the job of attending the queen. So the queen has to be fed with royal jelly from time to time. So, and you have to take care of the queen, groom the queen, etc. That's being done by some of the workers that attend for the queen. So next is the middle-aged bee, short form MAB. So their main job is building the nest and maintenance. So there's a little bit of overlap. This is not a strict segregation. There is always overlap with the previous group. So these guys are involved in nest building and maintenance, and also like maintenance similar to the bees that are 3 to 11 days old. So nest building, how it is done is with beeswax, and the beeswax is secreted from in between the cuticles, like you can see here, how wax is formed from the abdomen of a bee. Uh, so this is called propolis, which is called beeswax. So this is a substance that they use to build the combs. So interestingly, when you hear honeycombs, the first thing that comes to your mind is our hexagonal cells. But what happens is actually they start building the nest in a round fashion, and because of the surface tension that occurs, it assumes a hexagonal shape. So, so the next thing that these guys do is nectar receiving and processing. So what happens after bee comes from foraging on nectar? So nectar is nothing but a sugar solution that are produced in flowers and are taken up by the bees. So the process of turning this nectar into honey is done in such a process called nectar processing. So what happens in nectar processing is that the bee that comes in with the nectar passes or regurgitates it into the mouth of another bee, and then that bee again takes in that nectar and then regurgitates into the mouth of the other bee. So this chain goes on for uh, a 10 to 15 or 20 different bees. So basically, one bee regurgitates this nectar to the next, that bee regurgitates it to the next. So what is happening here is actually the nectar is being mixed with as much as enzymes as possible from different bees. So what these enzymes do, they break down the sugar and then they convert this nectar into honey. And while in this process, the honey becomes more and more concentrated, the sugar concentration increases and becomes concentrated, and then finally once it is a honey state, they regurgitate it into a cell, into a clean cell, where they again, once the cell is almost full, they fan in front of the nest, in front of the cell, to further concentrate the solution. And then once the honey is completely matured, they seal it off or cap that cell off. So another process that these bees do is guarding the nest entrance. So at this stage, middle-aged bees, their stingers are active, which means they can give a pretty bad sting. So they sit at the front of the hive entrance, and then these are called guard bees. So any kind of disturbance in front of the hive, these guys get agitated, and they are the first to respond in case of an attack. So another thing that these guys do is called fanning behavior, wherein these guys sit in front of, so here you can actually see a GIF image of bees doing this fanning behavior. So what this essentially does is create a air circulation within the hive, which regulates the temperature of the hive. So yeah. So here, so the next stage from the once the middle-aged bees pass their age, they become foragers. Foragers is the last stage of their development, and foragers can be of different types. They can forage for different resources. So one major resource is pollen, or another one is nectar, and they also forage for water and minerals. Here, this is an award-winning National Geographic photograph of bees drinking water or taking up water. This is the foraging aspect, whether it is nectar, pollen, or water and minerals, depends on what the requirement of the hive or the stage in which the hive is at that point. Here there is actually a okay, there is a YouTube video which I forgot to. Okay, which we'll see later. Long live the queen. So we have discussed about why the queen lives for a very long period compared to the worker. It's all magic of the substance called royal jelly and the effect of royal actin. So the queen bee on an average survives for 3 years and can even go up to 5 years. So the queen throughout her reign keeps her subjects loyal and hardworking, which means that she has control over the colony. So how the bee does this is by secreting a queen substance. So this is the queen substance is actually a pheromone that is created by the queen bee. and it is secreted from the mandibular salivary glands of the queen bee, and this is taken up by the workers by smell or by ingesting, and then while this the honey transfer or the nectar transfer is going on, it goes into other workers, and that is how it spreads throughout the colony. And what this wonderful substance does is they keep the workers sterile. So the workers are born sterile, and it is ensured that they are kept sterile with the effect of the queen substance. So while the queen is alive and producing the queen substance, the workers remain sterile. So, and also this queen substance is also known to activate and to keep the bees working hard. So once the queen is not there in the hive, what happens is that the workers become dull, they become lethargic, and they can't work anymore. Then it also serves the function of attracting drones from the drone congregation, like we saw earlier. So the drones are attracted to this queen substance, and the drones go behind the queen like a comet. So the actual shape of the drone congregation changes to the shape of a comet like appearance, and then goes behind the queen and try to mate with the queen. So again, the major compound behind this queen substance has also been known. I'll just mention the name. It's trans 9-keto-2-decanoic acid, which has been isolated and confirmed to be what is actually, the major effective component of the queen substance. Okay, so till now we discussed what happens when the queen is there. So at some point the queen has to leave, or at some point it might die. So there are two scenarios in this case. So in one case, the queen, when the resources are abundant, she starts there are a lot of resources, and she has laid a lot of eggs, including drones, unfertilized eggs. So she starts laying egg in a swarm cell. Sorry for writing that as queen cell. It is called a swarm cell. So the workers make, so depending on the state of the colony, if the state of the colony is in a really good state with abundant resources and so on, the workers start making the queen cells, the swarm cells, and the queen comes and lays eggs into the swarm cells. So the swarm cells in which the queens develop are visibly larger. So you can see here that they are longer than the worker or the drone cells, and they provision it with royal jelly. And while the new queens or the swarm cells, the queens are developing in the swarm cells, the existing queen just swarms off or migrates. So during this migration, they just take up all the some of the or a major share of workers along with the queen to start off a new colony. So that is what happens in this case. Then what happens is, anyone's guess, the queen bees, the virgin queen bees emerge, and the first ones out will seek out the ones that have not yet hatched out, and either destroy the cell, or if different queens emerge simultaneously, they attack each other, and then till only one queen survives. So in this image, you can actually see these swarm cells, and also you can also visibly see the drone cells. So drone cells are also larger, so it's dome shaped, while the queen cells are even longer, and or the swarm cells are even longer to harbor the queen. So another scenario is if the queen dies. So what happens if the queen dies and there are no swarm cells? In this case, so there is no more queen substance. What happens is that the existing workers select a few larvae and then convert the existing cell into a queen cell, and then provision it with royal jelly uh, uh, in an attempt to rear a new queen. So they try this several times. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Uh, uh, so they initially people thought that this selection of these larvae for making them queen is random, but recent studies have suggested that it is the nutritional state of the larvae that the workers consider in selecting whether or which larvae is better for making it into a queen. So suppose that doesn't work. What happens is that the colony still doesn't have the queen substance. The workers become lethargic, and what happens is, since the queen substance is not there, the queen substance was earlier suppressing the sexual maturity of the workers ovaries, and now that the queen substance is not there, the ovaries start maturing, and then what happens, that they're capable of laying eggs, but they're not capable of copulating with another male because their copulatory structures are not developed. So what the workers do is that they start laying unfertilized eggs, and we all know what unfertilized eggs means. They only give rise to drones. So this can be considered as a last ditch effort of the hive to spread their genes. So these drones can emerge, and then they can go into these drone congregation areas, and then they can mate with another queen, thus passing on the genes of that colony. So that is this is one of the most interesting dynamics that happens inside the hive. So we can actually easily tell apart a swarm cell from a queen cell that the workers have made after a queen has died. So the swarm cells are usually at the tip of the comb, facing downwards, whereas the queen cells are usually on the face of the comb somewhere, and protrudes like this, like a peanut shape. That's how we can tell them apart. So one of the least talked about caste in a bee colony is the male or the drone, just because they have been called the lazy guys of the colony. They don't forage, they have to be fed. Most of their life they have to be fed. They don't do any activities in the hive. They just go to the drone congregation areas. They just fly around there, wait for the female, and once they run out of energy, they go back to the hive, drink nectar, pack up full of fuel, and then again go back to the drone congregation areas. So the hive doesn't allow too many drones in a colony when resources are limited. So so the male, as we know, is haploid. It has no stinger, so it cannot sting. But the drone is also very well adapted, interestingly adapted for its sole purpose, which is mating. So they have huge eyes, so you can actually see how large the eyes are. They occupy most of their head. So compared to a worker or the queen, the eyes are at least 2 times larger. So what that helps is overall sensitivity, increased sensitivity, and also a large field of view so that it can see and pursue the queen. So that is an interesting or a great adaptation for these drones. And here we can I have put up a picture of a Xylocopa bee, a male Xylocopa bee. So you can actually observe a very interesting behavior wherein if you throw something above this particular bee while it is perched on a stick or something, you can actually see the bee trying to follow the rock, believing that it's a, or hoping that it's a female. Yeah. So another interesting aspects of honeybees is their uh, ability to defend the colony. So the first thing that comes to our mind when we hear bee is, one is honey and the other would be the sting. So the stings of these honeybees is mainly for defensive purposes. So as I told earlier, these bees came from wasps. So most of the wasps have ovipositors, which through course of evolution got modified into stingers in case of these worker bees. So as you can see, here is an electron micrograph of a stinger of a worker bee near to a needle. So you can see barb-like structures that point inwards, which actually produces more damage or creates more damage to the attacker of the hive. So in case of honeybee stinging mammals, what happens is that the stinger gets trapped in the skin because of these barbs, and when it releases, what happens is that the stinger, along with the gut and the venom gland and the accessory muscles, everything gets ripped out, and the bee is doomed to die. But when it attacks other insects, it is quite the opposite, where these barbs help penetrate the exoskeleton of wasps or other insects attacking insects, and helps inflict more damage on their bodies, and it doesn't get stuck or doesn't get ripped out. Another interesting defense mechanism is called heat balling, wherein attackers like wasps, hornets, etc., what happens is the bees just cover these hornets or wasps or insects, and then start vigorously vibrating their abdomen, also trying to sting the wasp, and just ball it up. You can see an image of a ball here. So what happens is that these bees vigorously vibrate their abdomen, increasing the heat, basically cooking that particular insect inside the heat ball. So here you can actually see a thermal image of a heat ball, and the interior of the heat ball gets quite warm, quite hot, thus cooking the wasp or any attacking insect inside. So that is one interesting defense mechanism. And then in honeybees, you can also see something called a shimmering behavior, wherein they jerk their abdomens and then produce ripple-like patterns on the hive. Probably it is a defense mechanism, probably to just intimidate the predator, like a wasp, just giving the feeling of a super organism or a big organism there, thus scaring away wasps or other insects that are trying to hawk the bees off of the hive. So that is one interesting. So all three of these are defense mechanisms that we see in honeybees. So next, just go to, in an event of a sting, what to do. So the first thing is obviously to run and hide from the bees. So why? Because as many of you may have heard or even seen, that when bees attack, they do so in large numbers. So how they achieve this feat is through alarm pheromones, which are released from a gland in the bee called the Nosinov gland. So they release this alarm pheromone. Basically, it is kind of tagging the attacker, and the other bees know where the attacker is, and then they can just follow the first attacker and just follow the scent of the alarm pheromone. So if you get stung, and then if you run away, you take shelter and then come out after a 10-20 minutes, even then the alarm pheromones can still be on your body, and the bees can seek you out and then sting you. So it's always better to either rub the area with, obviously the first thing you have to do is remove the stinger, then use alcohol to wipe that area to get rid of as much as possible the alarm pheromone, and then preferably take a shower or so to remove traces of alarm pheromones on your body. So the bee venom has so one of the major components of the bee venom is apitoxin, which causes pain, edema. So this particular venom is actually cytotoxic and hemotoxic. Cytotoxic means it affects cells, basically lyses cells, and also hemotoxic means it ruptures RBCs. So in small amounts, for most people it's not harmful, but in the event of multiple stings, it can be fatal. So the first thing that you can do after you get a sting is remove the stinger, then keep an ice pack or keep ice so that the swelling is reduced and the spread of the venom is reduced. Then you can also apply antihistamine ointments to reduce the swelling, and very few, like I don't know the exact statistics, but rarely people can go, even with just one sting, people can go into anaphylactic shock, which is a severe form of an allergic reaction, which can cause severe medical conditions. So in such cases, immediate hospital care is required. So here you can actually see a thermal image of a person's feet. So one part of the feet in particular appears very reddish. So that is the part where this person got stung, and the huge allergic reaction is happening at that place, which results in increase in temperature in that region of his leg or his or her leg. So services and commercial value. So as we all know, bees are known for pollination, which has been mutualistic, an example of mutualistic interaction that we have heard from 10th standard onwards, maybe high school, maybe. And they are cited as good examples for coevolution, wherein the flower develops a particular strategy to attract the bees, and the bees develop a particular strategy aiding in helping in pollination of these particular flowers. So that keeps happening, and about 1/3 of the world's food crops depend on varying degrees on pollination, and these also include managed honeybees. Managed honeybees means those honeybees that we keep in apiaries or in bee boxes. So this was published in a study in 2018. Then this particular mutualism or this pollination is further made effective by a particular behavioral effect or a behavioral aspect of bees foraging called floral constancy, where they keep on foraging on a particular species of flower over and over again in a patch, ignoring all other flowers that are flowering in that region. So this helps the pollen of the same species of flower to fall into the stigma of the same species of flower, which helps in fruit set and seed formation and fruit set. So here you can actually see all the pollen. We extract pollen by keeping pollen traps for bees, and we can collect pollen via that way. Then royal jelly is another commercially viable item. Then honey, of course. And here in this comb, you can actually see how they pack pollen. They mix it with honey so that it is fungi or bacteria resistant, because honey has that property, an antibacterial or antimicrobial property. So they mix it with pollen so that the pollen doesn't go bad, and then pack it tightly into cells. So these pollen packed with honey into cells is called bee bread, which they use to nourish their young ones, the larvae. So next, coming to an interesting aspect of foraging, vision and navigation. So they have color vision. It's been known that they have color vision, and they are trichromatic, which means they have 3 receptors, which is UV, blue, and green photoreceptors. So in contrast to human beings, we have red, green, and blue. So bees cannot perceive red color, while they can actually see UV, which we cannot see. So the world probably most surely looks very different for a bee as compared to how we see the world. So a flower that can be yellow to our eyes can look entirely different to a bee. This is a false color image of the same flower, wherein we have falsely colored the UV reflecting or the UV absorbing areas, and the flower looks extremely different when we consider UV. And this basically acts like a bullseye for the bee. The bee knows exactly where the resources in a flower are situated because of such colorations in flowers using this UV patterns. So such color patterns are called nectar guides, because they basically guide the bee towards where the nectar or the pollen in that particular flower is. Then coming to navigation, they use multiple sensory modalities to forage, get nectar. These include odor, vision, etc. They are known to travel almost 3 to 4 kilometers, and sometimes even up to 10 kilometers in some cases. So Apis mellifera is known to forage even 10 kilometers. So they also depend on polarization patterns in the sky for their navigation. So the polarization pattern in the sky is basically just saying that the light coming from the sun is polarized in various degrees across the sky, and this can be easily visualized using a polarizing filter. Here you can see how this particular axis blocks most of the light, which means that the direction of polarization is happening in this direction. The bees can see this, and they can use that as a way to navigate. So coming to who made bees the stars they are today in the world of research. So this person is called Carl von Frisch. He won the Nobel Prize in 1973 for his outstanding work on bees. So he is the one who first decoded or characterized the dance of the bees, called the waggle dance, which I hope some of you have heard. So I'll just play a clip of a bee's waggle dance and then explain what it actually means. So the waggle dance is a way of communication by the bees. So a forager bee goes out, finds a very optimistic or a very good patch of flowers with very good resources, and it comes back to the hive. It has to have some way of communicating to the members of the hive that there is such and such resource in a particular distance away from the hive in this direction. So this is communicated by the forager to the colony mates by means of this waggle dance. So what the bee basically does, it comes back to the hive, it makes a waggle, and the direction of the waggle is the direction of the food resource with respect to where the sun is at that point, and the duration of the waggle run tells the colony mates or indicates to the colony mates the distance towards the particular food source. So we have two different messages communicated here. What is the angle, or which is the direction in which the other bees have to travel in order to get the resource, and how long, or how long do they have to travel to get to that particular resource. So this, the Carl von Frisch has done a lot of work on waggle dances in bees, and he was the first one to decode this message. So, so one interesting question that had plagued researchers for a very long time was, how do they actually, calculate the distance to a particular food source? The direction, of course, it can be easily understood, because the sun is the major cue there, and they can use the sun to assess the angle towards the food source. But calculating the distance, that was kind of a tricky question of how they are able to calculate the distance to a particular source and then communicate it back to the hive. So the waggle duration is what signifies the time, or the distance. The waggle duration is what signifies the distance to the food source. So there have been certain experiments and certain hypotheses of how they calculate distance. So one hypothesis was that they calculate the energy expenditure during the flight, and then convert that into a waggle dance, and then do the waggle dance, and then tell their colony mates. So to address that question, what researchers did is attach lead weights to honeybees, and you have two sets of honeybee workers foraging to the same resource, but one has lead weights on it and the other is weight free, and then see whether they assess the distance in different ways. But these types of experiments didn't show much promise. Then later it was discovered that it was the optic flow towards the resource, or the direction towards the resource, that is actually playing a major role in assessing the distance towards that particular food source. So what is optic flow? So it is the pattern of apparent motion of the object, how you perceive speed differently. So it can be explained in very simple terms, wherein you go at 60 kilometers per hour in a narrow road, you feel very scared, and while you go at 60 kilometers per hour in an open highway, and you perceive the motion as slower than when you go at the same speed in a very narrow congested road. That is because mainly your optic flow in a congested road is higher than the optic flow in on a very wide clean clear road. This is kind of a vague analogy. So it is the pattern of apparent motion of objects that your eyes perceive. So to test out this hypothesis, several experiments were done. One particular experiment was wherein you keep a hive uh, uh, in on the mainland, and there is a an island across a particular lake, and then you place resources or feeders at equal distances from the hive, one across the lake and on the island, and one along the mainland. So you would expect higher optic flow in the mainland and lower optic flow when traveling to the island. And indeed, what they found is that the distance perceived by the bees in while traveling to the mainland is higher than the distance they perceive when they forage to the feeder in the island. That means the foragers who traveled or got the food source from the mainland waggled for longer than those that visited the island. There are some more nitty-gritties of this experiment which I'm not going to delve into because of time concerns, and it might be a bit too much. This is this is just to show you or make you understand how behavioral studies in bees are done. I'm not covering this topic more. Now I just want to take you through some more of the interesting behaviors that some other bees show other than our social bees. So you can see these beautifully colored, metallic, shiny colored bees. These bees are called orchid bees or Euglosian bees. So they have they also visit flowers, but not mostly for nectar or pollen. They have some other hidden agenda, which is that they use these flowers for their mating behavior. So what these bees mainly do is that they visit flowers in order to scrape up the smell or the fragrance of the flower. So this particular behavior is called fragrance collection. So they visit these orchids, they scrape up parts of their petal or scrape their body against the flower just to absorb or take in the fragrance of that particular orchid, and they use this fragrance to entice the female. So the higher the repertoire of or the uh, more attractive these fragrances to the female, the better the chance of that bee for mating with that female. So how the flowers, so the flowers have also adapted to their particular behavior, and they have exploited the scraping behavior of this particular bees to their advantage, the flowers advantage, in which they trick the bees into going into the flower and then secretly attaching packets of pollen onto their back called pollinia, and then when they go and visit the next flower, the flower gets the pollen gets dispersed, and the next flower gets pollinated. So here's a short video clip of that happening. So this is the orchid flower. Yeah, so that is how the orchid bee collects the fragrance, and how the orchid is benefited by attaching the pollinia on its back, and then when the orchid bee goes and visits the next orchid, it deposits the pollen from the pollinia on the stigma of the next orchid, and that's how they get pollinated, and the orchid bee is also benefited by getting the fragrance of the orchid. So with that, let's come to conservation, and there is no ecology talk without the word conservation. So by conservation, it's not just conserving the commercial bees, like the apiary bees. Rather, it's about, so the only way to conserve all of bee diversity is basically to keep the native flora abundant and thriving, because maybe many other mutualistic interactions that we have yet to discover are still there, and we can only hope that it's not too late, that we have not discovered such mutualistic interactions, and many bees may have already gone extinct, or are struggling because of not having the native flora in which they forage or utilize for their life and life cycle. So that's all about conservation mainly. And as you know, in beekeeping also, we are facing a lot of challenges, like colony collapse disorder, that has been making headlines far and wide, where colonies suddenly collapse and then disappear. We still are not able to pinpoint what is the reason. It may be mites, it may be certain viruses, like the deformed wing virus, which deforms the wings of the bees. And recently we saw some articles on social distancing in bees, how they are preventing the virus affecting individuals of the hive by maintaining social distance, etc. So with that, I want to say that bees are very interesting, and I hope you find bees interesting. And with that, thank you. I end my talk.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. It was a fantastic session.
Thank
So
you.
I just opened the chat box. So who have questions,
Okay.
I mean, probably you can go through it. There's quite a few questions already popping up. So can you just go through it and answer it?
Where can I get the chat box?
Left the screen share video.
Okay, chat. Okay, fine. Yeah. So so yeah, so which so where is the stinger situated in the bee's body? So it is found in the last abdominal segment of the bee, and it's a modified ovipositor. So the ovipositor is this particular organ that wasps mainly use to deposit their eggs. So it is particularly long in wasps that lay egg into figs. So there are a class of wasps called fig wasps, and they use their long ovipositors to deposit eggs into fig fruit. So the stinger is a modification of this ovipositor, and it's located at the abdomen, at the last segment in the abdomen of the bee. And it is retractable. It's not always visible. It is ejected only when it's about to sting. To which family does orchid bee belong? So the orchid bee belongs to a group called Euglosidae, I think. Or Euglosinae, I'm not sure. So they're called Euglosian bees. They're not found here in India. Yeah. Are there any resources to learn about bees? Yeah, of course, there are tons of resources to learn about bees. There have been lots of books regarding bees. So they're all round interesting. There have been lot of behavioral studies. There are even papers teaching recently of teaching bees to to perform different complex tasks to achieve a particular goal of getting a drop of nectar, like pulling a string or pulling a particular type of string in order to get a reward, stuff like that, or pushing a ball into a hole, which is a goal post kind of thing, and then getting a reward. So yeah, there are a lot of literature available on bees, and you can also attend several bee conferences or bee workshops that you can get. Uh, Different labs that I know of conduct such bee courses almost on a regular basis. So yeah, you can keep your eyes and ears open to that. Yeah. So yeah, qualified the contribution of bees in India towards pollinating commercial crops like have in Europe. I am not aware of that. I haven't looked into that. Sorry. No, all species of bees do not have a colony and a hive. So I concentrated most of my talk into eusocial bees, wherein they have strict hierarchy and specific roles to different castes. There are bees that are communal. There are bees there are bees that are completely independent. There are bees that are communal. There are bees that are quasi-social. There are bees that are semi-social. So there are varying degrees of sociality within bees. So yeah, and there are solitary bees, which I was struggling to get that word. So yeah, there are also solitary bees that do not show any type of sociality. I hope that answers your question. Medicinal properties of honey. So one of the things that I can tell you is that honey, raw honey at least, is very rich in vitamin B12. So that could have positive health benefits. Other medical properties, there are no, I don't think there are any scientific studies, or at least I haven't seen any scientific studies corroborating the medical claims of honey. Even stingless bee honey is considered very medicinal, probably because they visit much smaller flowers, and most of the so-called medicinal plants that we see have smaller flowers. So maybe that claim is because of that, but no, I don't know of any studies checking the medical claims. So I think this particular question is how do the bees know that the nectar has turned into honey? So the question is, how do bees know when the nectar is formed? As you said, nectar is passed from one worker bee to the other. So the nectar is turned to honey at some point where the concentration of the honey reaches a particular stage. I don't know about any particular studies that have looked at what point nectar turns into honey. So I don't think that there's a specific point there. It's probably a particular range of percentages wherein the bee just regurgitates it into a cell, and later it's even more made concentrated by fanning the cell containing the honey, so that much more water is evaporated and it becomes much more concentrated form and turns into mature honey. Any bee invasion reported in India? Yeah, Africanized honeybees have been wreaking havoc everywhere. So it's it was a project kind of a thing wherein they hybridized two honeybee subspecies together, which turned into an aggressive form of bee, which is called the Africanized honeybee. I don't know the impact of such bees in India, although I know that they have been considered pests in other parts of the world. Okay, so how do they select the cell to feed royal jelly, or which one should become the queen? So if the queen decides to actually raise new queens, the workers will start making a queen cell, and the egg is deposited into the queen cell. So once it's a queen cell that is already there, the workers know to provision it with royal jelly. In the other case wherein queen dies and they're trying to raise a new queen, their studies have shown that they look at the nutritional aspect of the existing larvae. So the well provisioned, the well growing, the well nurtured larvae are selected and given royal jelly. So they select a few, maybe 3 to 4 or 5 different larvae, and they emerge and they fight against each other, and only one will remain. Extinct bee species, I don't know. Okay, thank you. Orchid bees are not found in India. Is there any research done to block or mask alarm pheromones from sting, like how odomos? No, there have not been. So the pheromone kind of goes away, when you apply alcohol. So it dissolves in alcohol, and just I think the best way to mask it is by getting a shower, and it lasts for somewhere around 30 to for maybe 45 minutes. So I personally have experienced bees tracking me down several 100 meters away from where I have been stung. So yeah, they are very keen and sensitive to this alarm pheromone. So better, if you are stung, stay indoors for at least 1 to 2 hours, maybe take a bath, and then that should block the smell or whatever. So it's since it's a pheromone, it evaporates away. It's volatile. So over time it goes away. So another interesting thing that I forgot to mention is that the sting, so the sting rips out from the honeybee when it stings a mammal, and what happens is that the venom glands and the accessory muscles are also ripped out, and these muscles keep on pumping venom into the body as long as the stinger is still attached to the body. So that is why it's always said that you remove the stinger as fast as possible when you get stung. Otherwise it just keeps on injecting more and more venom, which means that you will get a worse and worse allergic reaction, and possibly a bigger edema than you would otherwise get. How royal jelly is collected for commercial purpose, I'm sorry that I don't know the answer for that. I think it is collected from the cells where it is provisioned. I'm not so sure. Yeah, so I have heard of round dance also. Can you explain, sir? So round dance. So for bees to perceive or to interpret a particular distance to the hive mates in the form of a waggle, the resource has to be a certain distance away from the hive. It is, if it is very near to the hive, the waggle dance automatically turns into a round dance, wherein the the figure eight pattern is done, but without the waggle per se, because sense of direction, maybe the distance is not enough to get for the bee to get a sense of direction. So a round dance just basically means that it is communicating to the hive mates that see a resource is there, but it is somewhere nearby the hive, maybe a few meters, like maybe 3 to 4 or 5 meters away from the hive. Will there be change in composition of royal jelly, especially in commercial honey using only single? So no, royal jelly composition is not affected. Royal jelly is a secretion from the uh, uh, head of the bee, of the worker bee. But if you're asking about the composition of honey, whether the flowers that they forage has any impact on honey, yes, definitely, because the honey ultimately comes from nectar, and the nectar from different plants will have different micronutrients, macronutrients, etc. So some flowers may be rich in certain amino acids, some may even have some hallucinogenic compounds or aphrodisiac compounds. That is why certain types of honey are more valued than others, because of these bees visiting certain types of flowers.
Sudeep, sorry to butt in between. There is
Yeah.
a lot of questions are piling up, so probably choose 4-5 questions in that.
Okay.
The 11
Okay.
ones. Just quickly go through it.
Yeah.
You can answer.
Yeah. I think I'll select the questions that seem relevant.
Yes, please.
So how the preference for a single flower enforce nectar gathering? It doesn't enforce nectar gathering. We are so from the bees aspects, we are still running on experiments why they show this constancy. But from the flowers perspective, when it sticks on to one single flower, it ensures that the pollen from one species of flowers fall into the stigma of the same species of flower, thus ensuring seed set and fruit formation. And more constant a bee is, the more chance of that happen. When you mean that queens from other hives, yeah. So when you said that drones can mate with other queens, did you mean queens from other hives or from the same hive? Doesn't one hive have only one queen? Yeah, definitely. So so the drone congregations are usually seen at least 90 meters away from the parent hive. This is basically to kind of understood that it is to ensure that it can mate with queens of other hives. So 90 meters is the minimum that has been recorded. So they have been found several hundreds of meters away. And these drone congregations also, I forgot to mention that they prefer clear ground and less canopy and more clear ground areas for this drone congregation to occur. Yeah, so I've already mentioned what the alarming fall of bees in populations in Europe and what are the reasons. So it is called colony collapse disorder. So there have been different attributes. Some say that it might be because of some funguses, some viruses, some varroa mites. So all this might be causing that, and the main suspect probably is some kind of a virus that has been reported, like the deformed wing virus that basically deforms that the workers are born with deformed wings in such cases, wherein the workers can't forage anymore and the colony basically starves to death. That is what happens in that case. So different reasons may be there, but yeah, nonetheless that is happening. Hmm. So bee venom is acidic, so yeah, neutralized. So this has been, bee venom is acidic, so can be neutralized with alkaline solutions like sorbic soda, carb. Yeah, but the problem is the major thing that causes this, the inflammation is the epitoxin. So that is, uh, uh, you know, uh, cytotoxic and hemotoxic. So using soda carb doesn't actually do much, and mainly because the toxin is injected deep into the tissue and it penetrates the tissue very quickly. So soda carb itself, I would suggest that better than soda carb, just take an ice pack or some ice from the freezer and just press and hold that region with ice so that the venom spread is reduced and the edema is also reduced, the pain is also reduced. And if it persists and if it itches too much, we can use an antihistamine cream to reduce the swelling and pain in that region.